Okay, so here's a graph that I made the other day, and I was actually just talking to one of my athletes about this same exact thing last night, because I think it's really important to understand why heart rate increases during exercise. So if we're sitting here right now, our hearts are still beating, and that's because we need to supply oxygen to our muscles at the most basic level, right? So we need to be constantly taking in air, transporting some of that oxygen through the alveoli to the blood. That blood is now reoxygenated, and then we need to pump it through the body. So that's happening all the time, right, Will?
Yeah, and we also need to expire some of like the waste products, CO2 predominantly.
Right, so that'll be carried back to our lungs, and then we'll expire it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So it looks like what you've got here, Matt, is as the demand increases, as we start to work harder, increase our power output or just general force production output, our heart rate increases.
That's exactly it. So we need more oxygen, so we need more blood to be pumped to the muscles, and that's exactly what happens, and it works kind of in this cycle. So we engage our muscles, and we need to break down more substrate, so that means we need more oxygen, right? So we
Right.
transport more oxygen. We do more work, we need more oxygen, and it goes in that kind of cycle. And you can, if we go back to that graph, if we go back to this graph, we can see that that's exactly what's happening. So as we do more work, we need more oxygen, and then heart rate increases alongside that.
Yeah, and VE being the ventilation, it sort of decouples there. You can see right at the right-hand side of the graph. Won't get into it too much, but it's really the amount of CO2. When you produce lactate, we went over it. It's anaerobic without oxygen. Produces like toxic metabolic byproduct. We need to breathe harder while not requiring as much oxygen. So there's kind of a decoupling there, but pretty much like all we need to be concerned about is heart rate increases with the demands of the working muscle, and that's what it's here. It's cyclic in process. So if you calm down, you stop for your interval, your heart rate will begin to slow as the requirements of the muscle begin to slow. And if it's a super demanding interval, it will take a while because the replenishment of the muscle is still requiring a lot of substrate, a lot of oxygen, and the aerobic metabolism helps replenish those PCR, phosphagen, and anaerobic substrates. So there can be a bit of a lag there as well, but for the most part, it's just that cyclic process of you work harder, your heart rate increases to supply and remove the products needed.
The heart's actually a super cool muscle because it stretches. So as more blood is then pumped back to the heart, it can actually stretch. And if it stretches, then it can more forcefully contract and transport more blood. So as athletes get more trained, that's a lot of what we see happening. We get better stretch and contraction of the heart.
And that can also be like as you get fitter, aerobically especially, you may reduce your maximal heart rate because the cardiac output, and that is the distribution of blood around your body essentially, can be improved in two ways. Stroke volume, like Matt said, the stretching of the heart to get more blood in, and then heart rate. So the amount of blood and the rate at which you pump it around. So heart rate, obviously, just increase the rate. And if you are new to training, your heart's not super adapted to pumping a lot of blood. Maybe actual blood volume isn't really large either. And so you just kind of rely on heart rate to pump more blood around your body. But as you get fitter, you'll be able to pump more blood at a greater capacity around your body, and so maybe your heart rate will start to decline at certain work rates, and also the max may decline as well.
That's a really important message to drive home, because when we talked about aerobic development, that cardiac output is one of the things that takes the longest time to develop as an athlete. And if you're always exercising really hard, your heart's not really stretching a lot because it's beating so fast, right? So what we end up developing is hypertrophic cardiac myopathy, where we get like an increase in the density of the heart, which doesn't help it stretch, does it?
No, it's like any kind of muscle, like if it gets super large, it is a bit more harder to maneuver. Dr. Matt and I started the Performance Advantage podcast to help runners, riders, and outdoor competitors integrate sports science more effectively into their training and racing.
So over the last few years, Dr. Will and I have covered topics like the lactate threshold, training zones, power meters, and fatigue. Now we're condensing these popular and misunderstood topics into practical courses.
Our courses take our same podcasting style approach to learning and education, and we break it down into bite-sized chunks that you can digest either all at once or as practical little resources to use as and when you need them.
So the biggest difference between our course and any other course you might have taken is that we don't lecture you. It's a conversation between Will and I, and we're explaining complex sports science principles in an easy to understand manner.
Yeah, we also integrate how we use them on the regular. Our courses come with a certificate of completion, as well as a lot of takeaway resources such as training plans, scientific articles, and quizzes that you can do to check your progress along the way.
Our sports science courses are available now. Register on performanceadvantagepodcast.com for immediate access.